Hello, my people. It's your Negro with Aptitude and host of the Blackboard, Mickey Lee. Today is the unofficial Negro Independence Day, known alternatively as Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, and most popularly these days, Juneteenth. I first learned about Juneteenth from my Aunt Mary, who also happened to be born on June 19th. She was also my family's activist and Black history teacher. It was from her that I first learned to be Black and proud. She made a point of making sure I knew my people's history, and she was also one of my family members most instrumental in making sure I was prepared to be a successful contributor to my people's future. So happy birthday, Aunt Mary, and happy Juneteenth. To celebrate this auspicious occasion, I thought I'd present some interesting facts about Juneteenth. Black folks are always making up a new saying, and this one is no different. Juneteenth is a mashup of June the 19th, the date in 1865 on which General Gordon Granger rode into Galveston, Texas, and made the formal announcement known as General Order Number 3. This General Order Number 3 contained segments of the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been signed by President Abraham Lincoln 2.5 years earlier on January 1st, 1863. A little history on the Emancipation Proclamation. It was an ultimatum, actually. You see, in order to pressure the Confederate States, those states that had seceded from the Union, to return to the Union, Lincoln threatened to free the slaves of any states that remained in rebellion against the Union after January 1st, 1863. This is important to note because many people believe that the Civil War was fought to end slavery. This is false. The Civil War was fought to retain the country. Had those states rejoined the Union before January 1st of 1863, they would have been allowed to retain their slaves. It was only later in the Civil War that the focus by abolitionists, not President Lincoln, began to utilize the war as a means to end slavery. As such, it is even more important to note that President Lincoln did not free the slaves. Now, I know this means that many of you older folk may have to also take his picture off your walls, but he didn't free any slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was directed only at the states that had seceded from the Union and before 1863, and until the end of the Civil War, it was largely unenforced. Therefore, slavery wasn't officially ended in the United States until the 13th Amendment was ratified on December 6th of 1865, almost 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. I also want to point out this very important and usually overlooked fact. 200,000 enslaved Americans and freedmen enlisted with the Union Army. Note that I am saying enslaved Americans. That's what they were, born and bred, literally, on this land. They were responsible for building this nation, which had profited from their free labor for nearly 160 years. That's a whole century and a half before the country was even formed. Again, these enslaved Americans, along with some who were free, not immigrants, not minorities, not black and brown, not people of color. These are the people, these enslaved Africans and the free Africans and their black descendants are responsible for building the United States of America. In fact, all of the Americas. In addition to the 200,000 blacks who enlisted, thousands more worked as spies, cooks, laundresses. One very famous person you know, that's Harriet Tubman. She worked as a spy for the Union Army. So this included both black men and women. I repeat, Lincoln didn't free any slaves. The slaves freed themselves. As I noted in the previous fact, it took nearly 3 years from Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, to the passage of the 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery on December 6, 1865. As a result, various states abolished slavery at various times. So there are actually multiple Emancipation Days, and it is celebrated, for example, in Washington, D.C. on April 16th. In Tennessee, it is celebrated on August 8th, and primarily the festivities are located in Greene County, where Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln after his assassination, freed his slaves. In Ohio, Emancipation Day is celebrated on September 22nd. Some of these varying dates were because the news traveled slowly. Others were because soldiers were unavailable to enforce the proclamation, and other reasons were because slaveholders refused to release their newly freed Americans. In her article for Mental Floss, Stacy Conrad noted that Lincoln had used the telegraph, a fairly new invention, to share news and monitor news regarding the Civil War. And so he also used the telegraph to quickly get the news spread across the United States regarding the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, many newspapers immediately publicized that information. So it is untrue that news traveled so slowly that it took 2 years for the slaves in Galveston, Texas, to finally hear about it. They knew about it, but in Texas as well as other jurisdictions, the state constitution and local jurisdictions gave the slaveholders cover to ignore the proclamation and retain ownership of their slaves. Though Texas is widely thought of as the birthplace of Juneteenth, the earliest and longest-running celebration of Emancipation Day actually occurred in Gallipolis, Ohio. Gallipolis is located in southern Ohio. They began celebrating Emancipation Day in 1863, approximately 3 years before Juneteenth celebrations began in Texas in 1866. Ohio was a free state by that time. However, free and formerly enslaved Americans wanted to show their solidarity with the newly freed Americans, so when the Emancipation Proclamation was announced on January 1st of 1863, they organized a celebration for later that year. There is a Juneteenth flag. I've been walking this earth for 55 years and did not know there was a Juneteenth flag until I did the research for this video. The flag was the brainchild of activist Ben Haith, founder of the National Juneteenth Celebration Foundation. I didn't know we had that either. And it was illustrated by Miss L.J. Graff. The flag was designed in 1997 and later updated in 2000. The star in the center represents both the Lone Star State, as Texas is known, and the freedom of African Americans, or these days we're also called ADOS or FBA, in all 50 states. The bursting outline around the star represents a nova, an astronomy term for a new star. The idea was to represent a new beginning for the formerly enslaved people of Texas and throughout the country. The arc extending across the width of the flag represents a new horizon of opportunities and promise for blacks. The red, white, and blue colors are reminders of the American flag and that the formerly enslaved peoples were and are Americans. On June 19, 1865, blacks in Galveston, Texas became Americans under the law. Those colors also serve to remind Americans of all backgrounds to do better to live up to the ideal for liberty and justice for all. As of now, all states in the Union recognize Juneteenth except for one, and it's not a southern state. The state of Hawaii does not recognize Juneteenth. What's up with that? I thought the first black president was born in Hawaii, and y'all know I do not consider Barack Obama black. He is not ADOS, he is not FBA, he is not black, but I will not digress. So, what's up with that? Aloha. I said, what's up with that? Texas was the first state to make Juneteenth a state holiday. State Representative Al Edwards introduced legislation to make Juneteenth a state holiday in Texas, and it became law on January 1st of 1980. Since then, 3 other states, New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, also recognized Juneteenth as an official paid holiday for state employees. Prior to the Civil War, many enslaved and free persons escaped to Mexico to flee slavery. One such group, the Black Seminoles, along with other Seminoles, moved to northern Mexico and settled in El Nacimiento in the state of Coahuila in 1852. The term Muskogos, as they were known, may refer to the Muskogee indigenous language spoken by both the Creek and the Seminole peoples. Juneteenth is still celebrated there, though few of the remaining descendants are Black Seminoles. Special foods are prepared along with music and other festivities. Family members visit, including some from the Brackettville area of Texas. Now, before you start with that black and brown, warm and fuzzy feeling, please note that while Mexico did not participate in the slave trade, it did and does ostracize its black citizens. Just as in the United States, blacks or Africans were instrumental in Mexico's success as a nation, fighting in all of their wars, including their independence from Spain. Yet to this very day, Black Mexicans, or Afro-Mexicans as many prefer to be called, are marginalized in that country and forced to live in some of its most economically depressed areas. Further, it wasn't until a few years ago that Mexico formally recognized its black citizens. Still, they do not receive recognitions in many parts of Mexico and do not receive government support at the same level of other citizens. Further, much of their land has been stolen. These attitudes and behaviors by non-Afro-Mexicans are prevalent in their relationships with African Americans, or again, as we're called now, ADOS or FBA. Many white Mexicans will lie and say they first learned about racism in the United States. This is patently untrue. Anti-blackness is pervasive throughout all of Latin America. If I ever make it to El Nacimiento or Veracruz, I will be sure to look up mi familia. If you can remember from fact number 2, where I previously showed the text of the Emancipation Proclamation, the last couple of sentences are quite curious and troubling. These sentences, in fact, have set both the tone and precedent for how Black people were and are treated in this country. The final sentences of General Order Number 3, which is the part of the Emancipation Proclamation that General Granger read to the enslaved Americans, it reads as follows: "The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere." So while the enslaved were no longer slaves and were by law able to enter into a new relationship with their former slaveholders in which they would now be paid for their labor, they were not allowed to go to military posts. So protection was out. Even though 200,000 black men had fought in the Civil War, representing nearly 10% of the Union Army, and thousands more men and women had helped the Union Army to victory, working as spies, as laundresses, as cooks, and other essential duties. Also, they could not be found idle, so this means unemployed. Instead of the country rallying around their newly emancipated countrymen to give them assistance, guidance, direction, resources, and a loving way to finally contribute as full citizens, they were immediately shut out, shut down, and shut off. Segregation laws cropped up nearly overnight, initially as a way to thwart any celebrations of freedom, as public parks and other gathering places were denied to these newly emancipated uh, Americans. In fact, Emancipation Park in Houston, Texas, resulted from many newly freed Americans pooling together money. And when I say Americans, I mean the black people. I mean the former slaves. I don't mean anybody else. Anyway, these folks pulled together money to buy land on which to hold their emancipation celebrations. This uncharitable, unkind, hateful attitude also resulted in many ex-slaves being hunted down, killed, or returned to the plantations to work as sharecroppers, another form of servitude. Many people don't know that most sharecroppers were not free to leave the plantations and come and go as they please. In most cases, it required permission from the landowner. Sharecroppers worked intensely laborious jobs and made little more than their zero earnings as slaves. Those of you wanting to compare the immigrant story with the factual truth of slavery need to do more research. There is no comparison. The moral of the story is, even though blacks fought in the American Revolution and the subsequent wars before the Civil War, in which nearly 200,000 enlisted, and have fought in every single war after the Civil War, and we are the only group in which the United States has not waged an official war, and we have long served as the largest labor force and the country's moral compass, carrying every other group on our backs, including white people, and have been helping them fight for their freedom and equality. We aren't good enough to receive what illegal aliens receive in this country. Guess what? That crap ends now. Red food is essential to any authentic Juneteenth celebration. Red is an essential color to Juneteenth celebrations. Red soda water, watermelon, red velvet cake, and red beans and rice were just some of the ways the color was incorporated into the foods to mark the perseverance of blacks to gain freedom and equality. I also add that it commemorates the blood shed by Black people for this nation, not only to secure its prosperity, freedom, and power, but for its very soul, that one day it would live up to its Christian values and its creed of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of its citizens. We have paid the ultimate price, not even remotely matched by the so-called patriots. I got 2 words for you: reparations now. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned a lot about the origins of Juneteenth. Not only do we have our own Independence Day, we have our own national anthem too. Lift every voice. If you don't already know the song, be sure to learn it and teach it to your kids. In this very hour, we need every voice from every corner of this nation to finally unite behind the sanctity of Black life and the recognition of our innumerable and unduplicated contributions to this nation. Let us fight on till victory is won. Be sure to like this video and to share it. Also, become a subscriber if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate it if you hit the like button and the notification bell so you know when I upload new content. For more on the history and significance of Juneteenth, check out the resources in the description box and pinned to the comment section. Lastly, be sure to check out my video on Memorial Day too. There's a card at the end of this video. Until next time, I'm your Negro with Aptitude and host of the Blackboard, Mickey Lee.